Yes.
Paul has confirmed that he'll be happy to sign books after the session. The book signing area is in the far left corner here at the Rajnigandha front lawn. So please do go and purchase a book at the book signing area, and he'll be happy to sign it for you after the session. So over to you, Monisha.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me at the back? Could someone at the back raise an arm so that... Okay, great. You can all hear me. That's fine. I'd like to ask all of you to join me in welcoming Paul Theroux to the stage. He doesn't really need an introduction of any kind. He's an incredibly distinguished travel writer and a novelist and a journalist. And today we're going to be discussing Paul's, as a novelist, an affair with nonfiction. First and foremost, I actually want to just take you to that title alone. A novelist's affair with nonfiction. Does that feel right to you? Are you a novelist, and did you dally with nonfiction?
I think that I started off thinking of myself as a novelist. I think of myself as a novelist. I wandered into travel writing after publishing 5 works of fiction. And I wandered into it out of necessity. I needed to make a living. And if you have nothing to write and no ideas, it helps to just leave home, go somewhere, and find something to write about. And my advice to anyone who wants to write a book is leave home and go find something to write about. You won't find it in your mother's attic or your bedroom. You might actually have to leave. So I needed to make a living, and so I thought, I don't have an idea for a novel. I need to go and travel somewhere and do something that is not too difficult, but will satisfy my curiosity. And I looked at a map, and I thought, I can leave London, go to Paris, go from Paris to, it was called Yugoslavia, and then Bulgaria, Istanbul, Ankara, and there's a train, and I thought I could take a train from London to the border of Afghanistan, then take a bus through Afghanistan, and then travel through Pakistan, India, Burma, and go. And I thought, this is pretty easy, I'll do that, and then I'll take this trip, I'll go to Japan, then I'll go to the Soviet Union, and I'll come home on the Trans-Siberian Express, and I'll have a book. So,
but the way you say it...
In practice, it wasn't very easy. In practice, it was very difficult. I was away from home a long time. And you're all travelers. All Indians are travelers. You travel for work, you travel for piety, for rituals, for holidays, and you travel to go home. So, I mean, India's always on the move. What's the common denominator of travel? It's a big nuisance. It's full of delays. It's full of things that you can't write about. Who wants to hear about the fact that you were delayed for an hour or a day or a week? Does anyone want to hear about that? No. What do you want to hear about? Hardship. Hardship. Hardship is wonderful. Delay is horrible. So I think that's the conundrum of travel, is that a lot of it is just is difficult in a totally uninteresting way. And what's the antidote for that? Stay home. Stay home and write a novel, write a short story. To me, a blissful experience is just being home, walking around my pajamas and writing. I mean, to me, that's heaven. But it doesn't always pay the rent. So sometimes you have to leave. Sometimes you have to leave home. Soldiers, sailors, fishermen, many people have to leave home in order to make a living. Travel writers do that.
But the way you talk about this is like it's, this was just hopping on a bus and going down the road and picking up some groceries. It sounds as easy as that, and clearly it wasn't, because there's a lovely moment in Savidia's Shadow where you actually tell him that you've come up with this idea for a new book, and you explain that you're going to take the trains and you're going to go the whole way around and come back, and the way you talk about it, is quite intriguing to you that no one's ever done it before. Now, did you ever wonder why no one had ever thought about doing this if it was such a simple idea and it seemed so easy to do?
We're talking about...
Were you not worried that there was a reason why no one had done this?
Yeah, we're talking about the Great Railway Bazaar. It interests me a lot that, yeah, that no one had done it because it seems such a simple idea. But the same is true, you know, when I wrote the book about the old Patagonia Express, of just leaving home, taking the train to Boston, taking a train to Chicago, taking a train to Texas, to Mexico, Guatemala. I thought, you know, the simplicity of it is wonderful. And I mean, I guess if there's a distinction between a tourist and a traveler, the traveler is not in a hurry. I think a lot of people judge travel by the speed of it, the efficiency of it. A traveler is not interested in speed or efficiency. In fact, speed and efficiency mitigate against observation, the observation necessary in travel. And luxury too, comfort. Comfort is the enemy of observation. The more comfortable you are, the less you see. So you need to be seriously delayed, uncomfortable, and then there's something to write about. People say, well, you have a lot of negative experiences. In a way, the negative experiences or the challenges of travel, the serious challenge, I'm talking about life-threatening experiences or, you know, real difficult.
Can you give us a couple of examples of that, of your life-threatening? This is maybe something that you didn't put in any of your books.
Oh no, I've put them all in. The great experiences are the life-threatening ones. Those are the ones that those are the travelers' tales.
Are there any that particular, to this day, still stick out in your mind?
The most vivid experiences that I've had in terms of danger are a very young person pointing a very old gun in my face.
Where was this?
It's happened several times. It's happened in Malawi. Just a very young person with an old rusty rifle with his finger on the trigger. It happened on the border of Malawi and Zambia. It happened in northern Kenya. A shifter, they're from Somalia. Just, if you've had a gun pointed at you, your life, I don't know whether your life flashes before, but you think, this is terrible, I wish I had a gun to shoot this person. So that's happened to me 3 times. Another time...
Oh, hold on a minute, it's happened to you 3 times. After the first and second times, did you never have a moment where you thought, I've got kids at home, I really can't do this again? I have some kind of responsibility to not put myself in these situations anymore. Yes,
that's a passing thought. But also, after it happens, you think, I've got something to write about. And there's also, I was in, do you know where the Trobriand, raise your hand if you've heard of the Trobriand Islands. The Trobriand Islands. I see 1, 2, 3, I see 6, 7, 8, I see 10 hands. The Trobriand Islands are in the northeast corner of New Guinea, written about by Malinowski, Bronislaw Malinowski, a great anthropologist. He wrote a book called The Argonauts of the Western Pacific. Another of his books about the Trobriand Islands is called The Sexual Life of Savages. It sounds a raw title, but it's actually a serious book. I was there, I was paddling a kayak in a lagoon in the Trobriand Islands, and I got stuck. And 3 boys came up, and they said, the word for a foreigner there is a dim-dim. They said, go away, dim-dim. I said, oh, no, I'm trying to. And then they were fishing, and they began poking spears at me. And they realized I was sitting in a kayak on a mud bank, stuck, and there were 3 of them poking, not touching me, but poking rusty spear. Well, they weren't going to kill me, but if you get a poke from a rusty spear in the Trobriand Islands, probably it'll go septic, and you may have a serious problem. So you're talking about, this is now turning out to be Munchausen, Baron von Munchausen telling his tales. But that was a vivid, after that happened, I thought, I think I want to leave.
Okay.
I think, well, I got away. You know what I did? I said, I turned my back on them. They said, run you life, dim dim, you, dim dim, run your life, run for your life. And so I turned my back, and I thought, okay. I said, oh, don't be silly. That's right, don't be silly. It worked. It worked. And I was given superhuman strength. I got off the mud bank, and I just started paddling. I paddled to the capital, Losuya, camped out that night, and I took a plane the next day. I was very rattled by the experience.
So do you think
I did, but I went back to that.
Really?
That experience, you can read about that experience in my book, The Happy Isles of Oceania.
So when you mentioned in one of your books that you enjoyed Mark Twain's Following the Equator, largely because it had incidental mishaps, spirited jokes, and it was a very long journey. That kind of suggested to me that you need to have mishaps and you need to have misfortune and problems and dilemmas and questions to answer along the way to make travel writing what it is. I mean, without all of that, does travel writing even exist? I mean, how do you feel about the sort of new travel writers who employ all kinds of, carrying fridges around Ireland on their backs and let me see how far south I can get with $20 in my pocket and then make those into travel books? I mean, how do you feel about those kind of travel writers?
Well, Monisha, earlier we were talking about, apparently there's a book by an Irishman who carried a fridge on his back around Ireland. That's the theater of the absurd. It's also the antithesis of travel writing. The man who's hitting a golf ball across the United States or traveling with a fridge on his back is an object of curiosity. A traveler should be anonymous, invisible, an eavesdropper. It should be someone listening, not an object of curiosity. There's a man called Robin Hanbury Tennyson. He's a very good traveler, but I was talking to him once. Have any of you heard of him? Robin Hanbury Tennyson. He was the president of the Royal Geographical Society in London. Anyway, he wrote a travel book about China. And he said it's called A Ride Around the Wall or something like that. He rode a horse through, along the Great Wall of China, but rode a horse. And he said to me, the people were so amazed by us. The people were amazed by us on horseback. And I was thinking, the last thing in the world you want is for people to be amazed by you. What you need is to be anonymous, invisible. Not a pretty girl or a handsome man on a horse or a guy with a refrigerator on his back. You want to be nobody. You want to just blend into the crowd. When I traveled in South America, I drew a mustache. And people asked me in Spanish, where's the post office? I thought, this is a triumph. I was recently traveling in Arkansas. Are you familiar with the state of Arkansas? Most of the motels in Arkansas are owned by Mr. Patel, the Patel Gujaratis. Most of the motels in the United States are owned by Mr. Patel, or Mrs. Patel for that matter. Anyway, I was at there was a literary festival in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I just happened upon it. I went to the literary festival. This is apropos of being a writer, whether it's a fiction writer or a traveler. And I thought, I want to see this festival. So I saw the festival, not organizer, but a person at the main library in Little Rock, Arkansas. You're familiar with Arkansas because that's where Bill Clinton was governor. That's where he was born. And Bill Clinton comes to India all the time. Bill Clinton is India's friend. When the earthquake in Bhuj, Bill Clinton was there. Bill Clinton wants to rescue people. He wants to save you. So I was there in Arkansas, and I said to the woman, I'd like to meet the organizer. And I wrote my name. She said, what's your name? I said, I'll write it down for you. And she looked at it, she said, and what do you do? I said, I'm a writer. And she said, what sort of books do you write, Mr. Thorax? And I thought, I'm past retirement age. I've published 50 books. This is a triumph of anonymity. I was very happy. I thought, you don't know who I am, you don't know what I do, you will tell me anything. If you know that I'm a writer, you're going to be very guarded. But what sort of books do you write, Mr. Thorax? In the library of Little Rock, Arkansas, I thought, this is great. it's great, I'm happy. And no, she didn't have a clue. But that's all right. You know who I am. She didn't.
But also, isn't there that sort of fun with being a writer that in some respects you get the fame without, well, with the anonymity? You can come and go. I mean, not a lot of people actually, unless you specifically search for a writer, you wouldn't necessarily know what they look like.
I think it's a great burden to be a celebrity or to be recognized. It's a great, what if you were Amitabh Bachchan? Do I have his name right?
Yeah.
Amitabh Bachchan. And he's walking by here, everyone would look at him.
They wouldn't just
If he
look
was on
at
a
him,
bus,
you wouldn't see
they
him
would,
because he'd be
they'd
surrounded
go
by
after
1,000
him.
people.
But it must be a great burden to be a recognized, to have a familiar face, a face, you know, a household name, a household face. You can't be a writer, you can't be a traveler that way. A traveler needs to be anonymous. And I'm making a joke about what sort of books do you write, Mr. Thorax, but it really is important to realize that, you know, when you travel, you're a very small person. Travel and writing in itself should teach you you're very small. The world is huge. You need to cultivate your humility, I think. And then you can go on writing. But you don't want people, you don't want to be the focus of people's interests. And I think from that, you get literary ideas, you experience in the world in a much more authentic way. If you're just a face in the crowd, I think that's a wonderful thing. You don't want to be a celebrity, I think. Some people need to be celebrities. Some people need to be recognized. But I don't, honestly. I really don't.
Now, when it comes to sort of satisfaction with your books, in one of your books you mentioned that you'd written 10 books in 10 years, and then came The Mosquito Coast. And you said that that was the book that freed you, and it was everything that you wanted to do. What did you mean by it freed you? What was it about that book that made you feel like you'd achieved something there that you maybe hadn't done with the previous 10? Apart from the fact that it was turned into a film with Harrison Ford.
The Mosquito Coast is a book that is told by a 13-year-old boy. 13-year-old boy describing his family, the father in particular, and their travels. Huckleberry Finn is a book about a young boy. How old is he? He's 13. Huck Finn is 13. My kids at that age were 13 and 11 when I was writing The Mosquito Coast. And it was very important to me to write a book that my children could read, that they would relate to. So my eldest son was 13, and I was writing a book which he could relate to, and he could read and did read. And he became a writer himself, my son Marcel, who's here today. And so that novel satisfied me on many, many levels. On a very personal family level, which is, it's a book with two boys in it, a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old. It's a book about a man, you know, the classic thing of a man leaving the saying, I'm going to leave the United States, I'm going to start my own, I'm going to have an experiment, I'm going to go to Central America, and I'm going to develop a whole society. It's a man with a vision. So it was a big idea, I thought. And then I worked on it over a period of about 2 years, and I thought, you know, I was very happy writing it. I thought, this is an original idea, I'm working it out myself. I wasn't quite sure how it would end, but it was a very satisfying experience to write the book, to write a book that was accessible to a 13-year-old and to anyone, you know, above that. And, you know, if you could write a book that a young person can read, Huck Finn is such a book. Some of V.S. Naipaul's books, Miguel Street can be read by someone of, you know, very young person. Yet it's a book that will stay with you. And I think it's The Mosquito Coast, well, it was a critical success, it was a financial success, it was made into a film. You know, what's better than that? Just everything is flowing your way, and you think, well, I've realized my dream, I'd like to do it again. So, but it was the idea of the book. I'll tell you,
So are you saying then that you are very much conscious of who's reading your books when you're writing them. Are you very
Not
aware
so
of
much
the
when
audience?
that book, yes, because I thought it's the voice. I wanted to be true to the voice of a 13-year-old. And as a matter of fact, I thought, when I sent that book to the publisher, it was copy edited, and I thought, a boy of 13 doesn't know anything about semicolons or colons. He'll just have a dash, a thought dash, thought dash, thought dash, but won't have complex punctuation. When the book was copy edited, they took out all the dashes in the book and they put in semicolons. And I said to the copy editor, take out all the semicolons, because young people don't think like that. They don't think in semicolons. They think, so if you see the book, there are no semicolons in the book. There are no colons in the book. It's very simply punctuated. And so I was thinking about, yeah, I think about people read. I always think about people reading my work, because I'm not posing a conundrum. You know, I'm not challenging the reader. I'm trying to make the writing as clear as possible. I'm not trying to engage in obfuscation. Some people do. They set a challenge or a problem for the reader. I don't do that. I think, will a reader get this? Is this joke funny? Is this paragraph clear? Can you, if I'm describing a flower, can you smell the flower? Can you see what I'm writing about? Conrad said that. Joseph Conrad said, above all, in writing, I want to make you see. I want to make you see the people, see the scene, see the rain coming down. And you might think, that's a modest ambition. It's a very difficult thing. It's very difficult. This is why the apprenticeship of writing it's a long apprenticeship to find out a book. You know, I want to write a book that gives pleasure, a book that someone will say that, you know, we were talking about A House for Mr. Biswas earlier. That's a book I would recommend to anyone. It has everything in it. It has food, it has weather, it has people, it has argument, it has success, failure. It has a whole culture in it. And you know, to do that is a great effort of imagination and skill. So I've tried to do the same thing. Not to pose problems. There are many writers in English literature. James Joyce was posing problems, saying to the reader, you figure this out. I'm posing a problem. You figure out Ulysses. You figure out Finnegan's Wake. Samuel Beckett is saying, you figure it out. Nabokov, whom you know, he's saying, this is a riddle, this is a problem. You unravel this problem. That's not my role. I don't see that as my role in writing, to pose problems. I would like a book to give pleasure, but at the same time remind a person, I suppose, of a dramatic situation, an emotional situation, the human condition, whatever it is. But the problem isn't, or shouldn't be, in the writing. It should be in the drama of the book itself, the plot, the character, whatever it is.
So do you allow, or do you have certain people who read your books while you're writing them, or do you keep them very much to yourself until they're ready to go out to editors and publishers? Or do you have sort of specific people who you trust with your work?
I tend to write and to keep it to myself until I'm confident enough to. I might read it to my wife. I might read a paragraph or a page to my wife, just to hear my own voice and for her to respond to it. But in general, no, I don't show it to anyone. And I don't recommend showing unfinished work to people, because they may discourage you. They may say what you write may not be finished. It may be necessary for the thing to mature a little. You shouldn't be too eager to share your work. I think it takes some confidence and some patience, but I think showing unfinished work is not a good idea. It's not a good idea. You got to keep it to yourself. If you, even talking about it, if you talk too much about your work, you spoil it. It's a very private thing, writing, and I think you have to keep it to yourself till it's ready to be shown, ready to be read. And it's difficult to do, but I think it's necessary.
Now you said we discussed this morning, there was an interview in The Independent where you said that you write a novel with your right hand and do everything else with your left hand, including travel books and reviews and journalism. Now I could have taken that two ways. Does that mean that you're juggling everything at the same time, or that you find most of your effort and your thought goes into your novels, but you can sort of, I wouldn't say toss out your travel books with ease, but do you find that there's a lot more effort and a lot more thought that goes into your novels, and that's where you find your draw is?
It's not a question of effort. Flippantly, I say I write novels with my right hand and travel books with my left hand. I would say that a novel, when you start a novel, when anyone starts a novel, I think it's very rare to know how it's going to end. A travel book has a beginning, middle, and end, and you know how a travel book ends. It's impossible for me to imagine a travel writer having writer's block. You had the experience, you've been there, you have your notes, sit down, write it. You know, hit those keys, write the book. What's the problem? You had the bad meal, someone threatened you, you had a funny experience, you stayed at a bad hotel, you had a serious hardship, you got sick. Write about it, go write about it. But with a novel, you have a character develops over time. And the right hand is writing with less certainty. You don't know what is going to develop in the course of writing a novel. Strange things happen. In the course of writing a novel, an unimportant character suddenly becomes necessary and suddenly becomes important. And so you're groping toward a conclusion which you're unaware of with a novel. I mean, I think that tends to be, you have a general idea of what it's about and where it's going, but it has to develop. And for that to happen, you need to be very calm, happy, content, and not to be interrupted. So that's the writing, that's the right hand, traveling very slowly. You can't rattle the right hand. But as far as writing a book review, a travel article, a travel book, say you take a travel book. I've recently been traveling in the southern US, in the southern states. I've taken, over the course of 2 years, many trips down south, driving. That's why I mentioned Arkansas and Bill Clinton, and Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, the northern part of Louisiana, Georgia. So I've been traveling, circulating in the south, and realizing a lot of parts of the south have never been written about, at least not been written about recently. But I finished the travel, and I wrote the book. And you know, what's the problem? I have all these notebooks, I have the notes. All I need is time, contentment, and I can write it. But to write a novel, that's an experience of great tension, suspense, and uncertainty, writing a novel. I recommend it to you because it's a challenge. It's a challenge to your family, to your bank book, to your bank account. You just go in your room and you say, okay, go work. What do you do? Where do you start? Where do you pick up? It's a problem. It's a real problem. But I've been doing it for 50 years, so I shouldn't complain. And I'm not complaining. But you said the right hand, the left hand. I think the right hand is speculating imaginatively, and the left hand knows exactly what to do.
Now, talking about the difference between non-fiction and fiction, to what degree, let's talk about your travel writing first, to what degree do you stay in that genre of non-fiction? Do you ever find yourself drifting across slightly into fiction with your travel writing? Or do you think that you have a responsibility to stick to non-fiction and very much make it about fact?
I think a travel writer has an obligation to tell the truth, because otherwise you're just being clever and calling attention to yourself, saying, aren't I clever, I invented this. There's a book called Travels with Charlie by John Steinbeck. Have anyone read it? You know the book? Lots of people have read this book. Do you know that about 60% of that book is complete fiction? It never happened. Travels with Charlie, which is In Search of America, is balderdash, as you might say here, is cobblers, is bollocks. It just didn't happen. But everyone says it happened. John Steinbeck won the Nobel Prize. But a man went, it happened in an interesting way, how it was found out. A man who loved Steinbeck decided to go in search of Travels with Charlie. And he discovered that you couldn't get from place to place in the time span allotted. That places that he mentioned didn't exist. And so, you know, that's sort of an interesting thing. You say, I think Steinbeck I think he won the Nobel Prize after that. But he had you know, it's a strange conceit to think that not enough of interest happened to him, so he had to invent. Why? I mean, why not write? His wife visited it. He said, well, how lonely he was traveling. His wife spent half the time with him in very good hotels. But he never wrote about the good hotels. He never wrote about the visits to his wife. And I think, you know, that would have made quite a good book. So he could have written a better book by telling the truth, but he didn't.
But can you tell when you're reading certain travel? I mean, I don't know how much travel writing you read while you're traveling or, you know, in preparation, but when you're reading certain things, can you feel immediately that there's editing going on, there's personal editing, that things are missing?
I can tell, yes. I think I can tell in travel, in a travel book, when a writer is gilding the lily, when he's or she is inventing or padding it, making it more than it is. Yeah, I think I can. I have an instinct for that. It's why the travel book, anyway, we seem to be talking about travel books rather than fiction, but the travel book is a very hard to define, maddening form to define. But you can tell, you can even tell when someone's had great hospitality, staying in a great, is sort of repaying the hospitality by praising the place and saying, had a wonderful experience, lovely meal. You know, no one wants to hear about that. No one wants to hear about delays, and no one wants to hear about a wonderful time that you had. But I can tell generally if someone's been fabricating along the way. Yeah, I think so.
So now, moving on from your travel writing to your novels, starting with My Other Life, again, even in that novel, the protagonist is called Paul, and within 15 pages, you're back on the trains, and you spend sort of 4 or 5 pages, and it just feels like you're back home again, and you can't really escape it. I mean, how come you brought yourself into that, and you, to some degree, blurred the lines of fiction and non-fiction? How come you didn't stay completely in the fiction genre?
Well, all fiction is based on direct experience, or either a story that someone told you, imagining something that took place. It doesn't come completely out of the air. That fiction, even the most imaginative fiction, even, you know, magical realism, is based on something, personal experience. And so that's the origin of it. I wrote a book called My Secret History, which was some of it based on personal experience, others pure fabrication. And people said, oh, that's an autobiographical novel. Well, it wasn't. It was in the sense that all fiction is fundamentally or somewhat autobiographical or related to your own experience. I thought, well, I'm going to write a book in which I appear to be telling my life story, but it's all going to be, what if this happened? The what if. So I used my own name in it, and that was My Other Life. And I thought that was just, I suppose it was a literary conceit, you know, of saying, it looks like an autobiography, but it's a novel. My Other Life was a novel. My Secret History was a novel. And they both looked like autobiographical novels, but they weren't. I mean, they weren't direct autobiography. It was just, I suppose, playing with my own experience. But they were 85% fiction, which is, that's what fiction is. It's very hard to write a book which doesn't, for a writer to write anything, which doesn't have some fundamentally autobiographical element in it.
Because there was a moment in my other life where you meet the Queen, or Paul meets the Queen, and she does refer to one of the prime ministers as having fuzzy, wuzzy hair, and you did get into a bit of trouble with that and caused a bit of controversy because people thought you had met the Queen and she had said that someone had fuzzy, wuzzy hair. And I
there's an episode in my other life, which is, do you have a copy of it?
I do. Oh, no, it's
no.
not.
Okay, there's an episode where I meet the Queen of England, or the Queen of, Her Majesty the Queen. Did you ever read a book where someone met the Queen? Maybe not, huh? I thought, you see, at that time, the Queen has become a little more of a familiar figure. When I wrote it, no one was writing about the Queen, but I thought, I want to write about meeting the Queen. But I also want to write about meeting the Queen after a terrible thing happens to me. So I'm at the lowest point of my life, and I'm invited to meet the Queen. So I thought, wouldn't this be funny? And I tried to paint as authentic a portrait of the Queen as possible. And so it became, of course, front page news that the Queen, actually quoting the Queen and saying, but it's a good story, it's a very, very good story. I mean, I don't mean that that's a good story, but it's a great idea of a hard-up writer getting invited to a party and meeting the Queen. I don't know whether, has anyone else written about meeting the Queen? It's not done. In fact, when I lived in Britain for 17 years, and I remember if you just brought up the subject of the Queen, people would get, English people in particular, would get very kind of agitated and say, she works jolly hard, I said, well, yeah, yes. But I used to say, what about Prince Charles? Did he really go to Cambridge? Did he really study? What's it all about? Is she really wealthy? The Queen's touch can cure scrofula. And I used to think, well, the Queen, I was raised a Catholic, and the Queen is the head of the church. I used to say, so the Queen is really head of the church. She's sort of like a divine, like the Maharaja of Jaipur is a Surya. Well, the sun, he's related to the sun god, the Surya. That's a great thing, actually. So the Queen is also like a divine, at that time, not now, but she sort of, don't mention the Queen. She works jolly hard, and also she's defender of the faith, and head of the, is she head of the church? Anyway, she's defender of the faith, fid def, you used to say in the coins, fid def, defender of the faith. But did her son get a divorce? And you say, doesn't she have a problem? What does Prince Philip do? So I'd ask all these to be funny, at an English party. And it's not funny. It's not funny. Wipe that smile off your face, you would say. Nowadays, she's got a Twitter account, so I rest my case.
The last thing that I just wanted to close on was, I mean, you've brought this up yourself a couple of times in the last 40 minutes, but Naipaul and Servidio's Shadow, you told me that because it was so hard to write, it was one of your favorites. And I just wondered why. Why was, because it was hard, why did that make it one of your favorite books to do?
I think Servidio's Shadow was, have any of you read Servidio's Shadow? Any show of hands? Okay, okay, great. Well, you couldn't get it. It's a book about friendship. Friendship is more interesting than love. The whole of English literature is about is a love story. Shakespeare, it's love stories. Novels, love. But which are the novels about friendship? The plays about friendship? There are some, but friendship is a very profound thing. It's not about power, it's about equality. I help you, you help me. There's no sexual element in it. There's no power element in it. It's mutual understanding. So friendship is pure and wonderful. So I had a friendship with Naipaul, and it lasted a long time, then it ended, then it resumed. That's pretty great, actually. Why was it difficult to write was that it's reliving. I think this is why an autobiography would be very difficult for me to write, that it's a very emotional experience. You're writing about loss, failure, weakness, death. I wrote about my father's death. I found it was very hard. I missed my father. I loved my father. So writing about my father's death was difficult. So I was sitting there writing about it, and I'm thinking, this is so sad. I'm writing about my father. And that's why the book, but anyway, I managed to write it. But reliving the experience, reliving deeply personal, deeply emotional experience is a difficult thing. And maybe that's why we write fiction. That fiction is a kind of evasion. Fiction is a way of telling the truth in a slightly more oblique way. That reality is so difficult to bear that we make it into something else, something that has different highlights in it, that just has other elements to it. So it's like, say you go to a psychiatrist, or say you're telling a personal story, a difficult story. Do you tell the story directly and you say, this happened to me, then that happened? No, you tend to tell it in a very, very circuitous way. The best example is Heart of Darkness. You know Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad? Well, Heart of Darkness is about a man, Marlowe, who goes up the Congo River, finds Mr. Kurtz. People talk about Mr. Kurtz. He puts Mr. Kurtz on the boat. He starts down the river. Mr. Kurtz dies. That's the story. Is the story simple? No. When Marlowe tells the story, he tells about it. He's in the Thames estuary. He talks about England. He talks about going to Belgium. He talks about, it's though he's avoiding talking about Mr. Kurtz, who has degenerated in the Congo to the level of almost savagery, although he's very successful. So Marlowe telling the story tells it very obliquely. Writing Servidio's Shadow, I was trying to scrupulously adhering to the truth. But there's a way in which fiction is an evasion of that, or a way of encompassing the truth by telling it in an oblique way. And I would say that if you were sitting on a psychiatrist's couch, the psychiatrist doesn't say to you, so you're afraid of flying, tell me why. He doesn't say that. The psychiatrist says, tell me a little bit about yourself. What about your family? You know, they start way back, and then you work toward a fear of flying, or whatever it is, identity crisis or whatever. And you work toward it by starting way over here, and you go. And I think fiction is like that. Fiction is an oblique way of telling the truth.
Okay. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to bring it to a close there, because I think there'll probably be quite a lot of questions for Paul. Could you just raise your hands, and I think they'll bring around the microphones for you.
In my other life, you made a metaphor about your body being a capsule that holds the soul, which is basically where your literature comes from. And this being a very difficult duality that you have to live with, do you ever find one half of yourself overpowering the other? Do you ever make an effort to bridge the gap, which makes it easier to live, to write, to experience life?
That's a great question. I think but that really is the essence of the human condition, if you may say so. You have the spirit, and you have the flesh, and there's a constant battle. This is why religion can be so helpful, in that religion sort of resolves that duality by helping you concentrate your mind on a spiritual path. renunciation of desire. I mean, traveling in India is a wonderful experience in that. I've been on, this has happened to me a number of times, but most recently, I wrote about this. I was on an Indian train, and I met a Jain. He was a very successful accountant. And I said, we were talking about our family, and he said, I'll show you a picture of my father. And he showed me a picture of his father, and he said, my father was a very successful man. Now he's a mendicant. He's walking the roads barefoot with a, you're familiar with this, that he renounced the world, the flesh, the devil, and he's a mendicant. He's traveling the road like a saint. So renunciation is one path, so the Jain path. And I said to the man, so what will you do? Will you do the same? He said, yes, I'm a successful accountant, my business is fine, but when I get to a certain age, I'm just going to leave. I'm going to travel, I'll sleep under trees, I will go barefoot, I'll go to the Kumbh Mela and pray, and maybe I'll become a Digambara, you know, and everything will be hunky-dory. So you say, but for a Westerner to do that, very, very hard to imagine. But this is also the germ of a lot of fiction. This battle, desire, the flesh, concupiscence, you could say. That becomes, I won't say an ideal subject, but it's something that that many writers write about. Falling in love, falling out of love, desire. It's hard to imagine what a Jain novel would be, the ideal Jain novel, the ideal Buddhist novel. There must be such things, but generally a novel is about a struggle. It's the struggle. So I would say that what you say is, how do you resolve it? Many problems are resolved by writing about them. I would say, you have a problem? Don't tell me the problem. Keep a diary, write it down, write it out. When you write it out, it's like writing a prayer and it goes up to heaven. That writing about it helps you understand it. And I mean, that's one of the great things about writing, not that it's therapy or anything like that, but writing itself can help you understand a personal problem or can resolve an issue. And I would say that that's the basic issue, the spirit and the flesh. But all of you are familiar with that. I mean, Hindu mythology is all about that, the spirit and the flesh, isn't it? And so that's the essence of Greek mythology, Hindu mythology, is that. It's a struggle. Love, passion, murder.
Hi. I just wanted to know, when you travel to a place, are you looking to uncover something which you believe is a chief characteristic of that place, what it's known for, it's something very special about it, intrinsically, or is it your own experience with that place and your own story that you're looking for?
I'll tell you something, a secret, you can keep a secret. I travel for pleasure. I travel, honestly, not to suffer, but to find something out. And I wrote a book traveling through Africa, my most recent book about Africa. It's called Last Train to Zona Verde. First book I went from Cairo to Cape Town. Next book I went from Cape Town through to Angola. And I thought, this may answer your question. When I was in Angola, I thought, what am I meeting? I'm meeting people challenged, they have poor schools, poor roads, poor health care, and a bad government. I wonder, I thought to myself, how is that? Are they special in that, in Angola? Angola produces $86 billion worth of oil a year, gross $86 billion. And yet the schools are terrible, the hospitals are terrible, the government's terrible. Maybe that's why the government's terrible. And I thought, what about the United States? What if I traveled in a very remote, rural part of the United States? What would I find? Would it be like Angola or different from Angola? So to answer your question is, first, I travel out of curiosity and for pleasure, but maybe perverse pleasure, but it's the pleasure of discovering something. And so I told you this earlier, I traveled for 2 years in the South, and it's full of interest, it's full of revelation. I went to places I never imagined that parts of the United States are so poor, so deprived, education so bad, hopes so dim. And I thought, there's something to write about. If I had gone and it was all success, luxury, success, wonderful, I would have, you know, what's to write about? It's just everything's going swimmingly. So you report, well, everything's fine, nothing to write about. But in the South, you know, I started, when I first came to India, I didn't see the Taj Mahal, I didn't go to any of the sites. I thought, what I want to see is human architecture. I want to meet people, I want to talk to people, I'm interested in their lives. So when I traveled in the South, I just talked to people. I didn't go to any cities, I avoided gourmet restaurants. I wanted to see what the heartland, the hinterland, the rural areas were like, and the challenges that people face. And I thought, well, maybe I can find something out about that, and I did. I mean, you can read the book. But if you don't discover something in travel, there's nothing to write about. You're just repeating what someone else said. And to discover something, you need to be alone, you need to be, take risks. There's a challenge in it. You can't be shepherded around. You can't say, well, you know, have someone with you saying, oh, you should see this, you should see that. You need really to be alone. And in a way, you need to be lonely. And when you're alone and lonely and at risk, interesting things happen. Great things do not happen to someone who's comfortable living, you know, I mean, you can have a wonderful experience in a luxury hotel, but there's not much to write about. But if you're alone, lonely, and you're in a place, I was in northern Arkansas, and I said to a man, you know, I never imagined that this existed. The Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. He said, don't tell anyone, we want to keep it this way. But I thought, this is incredible. I had no idea that it was like this. And speaking of northern, rural Arkansas, it was like, I've never been to a part of the United States that was like it. I mean, first it's all white people, all rural people, and people feeling neglected, weak, ignored by the federal government. You know, it's kind of interesting. And the other thing is, people have deep roots there. So often when people come to the States, they say, you know, I came to the States, this is apropos of what do you discover. Sometimes I meet Indians in the States and they say, I don't feel at home. I said, well, how would I feel if I went to the Punjab and I moved into the Punjab and I became a panwala? I want to be a panwala in Ludhiana. Would people say, oh yes, Mr. Thorax, come to Ludhiana, open a panwala, you can be a panwala. No, they might say, what are you doing here? Huh? No, you're in the Punjab now. Well, there are parts of the United States, many, that are just like the Punjab, just like Assam, just like Mirzapur, just like Bihar. They're just like it. People have been living there for hundreds of years. They have deep roots, they're rural, they're poor, and they look upon strangers with suspicion. That's a natural human response. Those are the things that you want to write about, discover and write about. Yeah?
I think we've probably got to wrap it up there, I'm afraid. But please join me in thanking Paul for it's been really good fun.
Thank you very much.
Conversation. And also, I think Paul's going to be signing books at the back on the right-hand side shortly. So if you want to go and get your book signed, then that's the way to go.
Okay.
Thank you to Paul Theroux and Monisha Rajesh for that riveting session. And yes, the book signing area is in the far left corner. It's blue and white. It's looking a little dark right now, but Paul will be there signing books. Please do purchase a copy and take it over there for his signature.